What's going on, guys? This is Matt Sherifinski, aka the Sheriff Lifts, coming to you with another Q&A, excuse me, coming from my Instagram. So we can just launch right into it. The first question is, what are what I consider good genetics? And I'm going to assume we're talking about powerlifting. So I have a couple things written over here. I'm going to read off of them. The first one is going to be durability. Second one is going to be mental tolerance to monotony / toughness. Third is going to be muscle fiber type / insertion and origin. Basically, where are your muscle bellies? Number 4 is just going to be your leverages, and that's going to be more talking about, like your skeletal structure. And number 5 is going to be training response. Now, durability is pretty self-explanatory. How hard can you train? How long can you train before getting injured, before getting beat up? You know, before you need like a deload, anything like that, right? So the more durable you are, the better powerlifter you're going to be, because you can sustain more training, you can train harder for longer, and you are less likely just to get injured overall, right? That might also factor in then that when you do get injured, it's not going to be as severe because you are simply more durable. Your rehab is going to be faster because you are more durable, so on and so forth. Second one, mental tolerance to monotony and toughness. Pretty self-explanatory, but powerlifting is really boring. You do the same movements year after year after year. Even if you're doing like a conjugate program, a lot of those movements you're repeating, right? You're going to be eating very similar foods. You're going to be, trying to go to bed at the same times every night, getting a good amount of sleep. You're going to be going through these movements in terms of like the setup the same way week in and week out. At least these are all things you're going to do if you want to be a good powerlifter. And this can be mentally tough for people. So being able to embrace that monotony and be comfortable with it is a huge skill. And I think there is truly a genetic component to it. And so I think that is definitely high up on the list. If you're someone that really craves novelty all the time, you might be at somewhat of a disadvantage compared to someone who's really comfortable just doing the same things day in and day out for years and years and years. Number 3, muscle fiber type and insertion and origin. Basically, if you are someone who has, slower twitch muscle fibers, you're probably not going to be as good as a powerlifter. You're going to end up doing a lot more volume than someone that has faster twitch muscle fibers, right? You can correct me if I'm wrong. People kind of argue about this, but I believe that faster twitch muscle fibers also are more susceptible to hypertrophy training, meaning they can get bigger more readily than slower twitch muscle fibers. So again, there's more capacity for growth there. And then just looking at like muscle lengths, right? Like some people might just have favorable insertions and origins to where they can exert more force through the competitive movements. Number 4 is leverages, actually how your skeletal structure is built. I will go ahead and say this. Powerlifting is a short man sport or short women sport. If you are someone that is 6 foot tall and very lanky, you are probably not going to be a good powerlifter. You're going to be a good strongman, but not a good powerlifter, right? So looking at how someone is built can kind of give an indication of if they're going to be a good powerlifter or not. I would say the best genetic example of like perfect leverages, in my opinion, is Ed Cohn, obviously because he is the GOAT in my book. Very long arms, short-ish legs, short-ish torso. He really made everything work to his advantage. He had a great squat, he had a great bench, and an amazing deadlift, right? So that's another factor to consider. And lastly is going to be training response. If you are someone that needs to train, balls to the wall all the time with a lot of volume and a lot of intensity, but you rarely PR, or your PRs are very few and far in between, and even then they're not a lot, you might just have a poor response to training, in which case you just might not have the best genetics for powerlifting. Conversely, we all know someone that, if they just look at a weight, their bench goes up by 20 pounds, right? So that's the last factor that kind of goes into the genetic components of powerlifting. So obviously we can say if you are very durable, If you are very tolerant to monotony and boring things, you have a lot of mental toughness, you don't get bogged down by bad days, you don't get bogged down by injuries, things like that. Muscle fiber type, if you're like an explosive lifter, right? Mostly fast twitch muscle fibers. Number 4, if you're kind of built short, stocky, you're not incredibly tall and lanky, excuse me. And number 5, training response, if you just, look at weights and you just get stronger. Those are all what I would consider good genetics for powerlifting. All right, next question is gonna be ideal size of a meet and flights for like optimal rest. I would say, since I compete at mostly pro meets at this point in my career, this is what I'm gonna go off of. For me, I would say smaller meets of about 30 lifters or so, and having maybe 3 flights of 10 lifters is gonna be ideal. Reason being is that, number 1, hopefully you're coming into powerlifting and you're not completely out of shape, right? It doesn't take that long to recover from, a single on a squat, bench, and deadlift. If it does, you really got to get your conditioning up. So that's the first consideration, right? So I don't need all day, an 8-9 hour day to put up my best total. My best totals have been done in like 4 to 5 hours. And the most recent one I just did, where I hit a 550 dots at 198, I think we were done in 2.5 hours, right? So it doesn't take that long. Number 2, shorter meets like that are going to be much better for the spectator. No one really likes coming to powerlifting meets anyway. I'm sorry to break it to you. The only ones that really care are the lifters themselves, right? So we want to have shorter meets so that people can get in and get out, right? And that way they're actually keeping their attention versus dragging on for 8-9 hours, right? By the time deadlifts roll around, everyone just wants to leave. So in short, I would say shorter meets, 30 lifters to an actual meet or even a session, right? At the most, and ranging from like 2.5 to like 5 hours at most. That's kind of how I would say an ideal meet or flight scenario, whatever you want to call it. That's perfect for me. All right, next question. How do you warm up for a top single versus a top rep set? Super easy answer here. I'll use like a 405 pound squat as an example, right? So what you might do for both of these examples is you're going to take, the bar for a couple sets of maybe 10 to 15, 135 for 2 sets of 8 to 12, 225 for 2 sets of 5 to 8, 275 for a set of 3 to 5, 315 for a set of 1 to 3, 365 maybe for a single, and then you'll go 405 for a single. Or if you're going to do reps with 405, you're going to take, 365 for that single and then go right to 405. You could argue that you could take something like 385 in between. That's totally fine. I don't think this is necessarily something that you need like to plan out incredibly well, but if I had to give numbers for it, I would say you want to aim for 4 to 6 warm-ups before your top set, before an opener, whatever it may be. And you want your last warm-ups to be anywhere between, for squat, 90 to 95% of your goal. Bench is going to be probably like 95 to 97.5%. You could even say 92.5 to 97.5%. Deadlift may be different. It may be like sumo is 90 to 95% of your top set, and then conventional might be like 87.5% to 92.5% of your top set. I'm getting those percentages actually from Marcellus from Powerlifting Now. He put out a video on there that's really fantastic, talking about like what jumps to take and some suggested ranges that he notices works really well for his athletes. So if you're on Powerlifting Now, go check it out. If you are not, you're missing out. But that is generally how I would set things up for warming up for a top set or a top rep set. Biggest thing is just don't overthink it. All right, next question. Is timing for protein or creatine important, and how should you structure it? Creatine, not really. When I used to take it, I would just take it first thing in the morning with all my other supplements for the day. That way it was out of the way. You could argue that you want to take it post-workout because it's going to be absorbed the best, but I mean, at the end of the day, consistency is king. So if you're going to be more consistent doing it in the morning, just do it in the morning. As for protein, there's a little bit more nuance with that. And I'll give kind of my 2 scenarios. First scenario is just as long as you're hitting your protein targets, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. I would say that's good for most general gym goers. If you want to optimize, I would say, let's say you're 200 pounds, you're eating 1 gram per pound of body weight. You're eating 4 meals, so obviously 50 grams of protein per meal. You're going to want to space that out every 4 to 5 hours or so, right? Making sure you have the same protein feedings for every single meal you eat. And then if you want to optimize even further, I know there was some study done where there was no limit to the muscle protein synthesis that occurred post-workout. So basically there used to be this old prevailing thought that your body could only absorb a certain amount of protein like post-workout. There was like a limit, and now there's not. So I guess what you could do is even further this by skewing most of your protein post-workout to really get that anabolism. But I mean, honestly, I would just skew the protein feedings, equally throughout the day. That way you're getting the same amount each meal. And that way you are staying satiated, because protein is incredibly satiating. So that's the way I would just do it. I wouldn't read too much into it. A lot of this stuff is going to be how consistent can you be over the long term. And if that means that you eat very specific amounts per meal, then so be it. If that just means you kind of graze throughout the day, as long as you get it all in, then that's perfect too. Next one, not taking creatine to make weight for a competition. Yes, that is a good idea, because creatine is going to hold some body weight, or hold some body water, I should say. So if you're really concerned about making weight for a competition, what you can do is just not take creatine, or you can completely stop taking creatine prior to your weigh-in or prior to your event. That way you might lose maybe a kilo and a half at the very most. And that's just one less kilo or kilo and a half that you have to lose when you go to, do your gut cut, do your water loading, your sauna, etc. Next question. What am I looking to emphasize when someone is coming to me, if they're trying to learn to deadlift or they want to improve their deadlift? It comes down to 3 things. Number one, the lens that I'm looking through is 3 things. Number one, is the lift competition legal, right? So making sure we're not hitching, we're not ramping, we aren't, letting our feet move while the lift is going on, right? Basically avoiding things that are going to give us red lights. Number 2, can we manage our center of mass efficiently, meaning that we aren't too far back on our heels and, basically using the bar as counter leverage. Conversely, are we, too far forward on our toes and letting our heels come up off the ground? Basically just making sure we're staying balanced over the barbell. We have a good wedge, we have a good slack pull, everything like that. And then the third thing is, can we generate force efficiently, right? So the last one is kind of dependent upon how you set up, but just making sure we're set up in a good position and we can obviously put as much force as we can into the barbell, right? There is this kind of like dichotomy between positioning and force development. If you think of like a bencher with a really wide grip, really big arch, they might not be able to put a ton of force into the bar in that position, but because their positioning is so good, they can still lift maximal weights. Conversely, you might have the opposite of someone that's like Julius Maddox, really close grip bencher. Their positioning may not be optimal in terms of the range of motion is very long, but they can put a ton of force into the bar, right? So I'm trying to meet somewhere in that middle there when I first start working with someone. And then I might start working them towards one range or the other, depending upon their strengths, their weaknesses, how they're built, how they respond to the training, so on and so forth. So those are basically like the 3 things I look at. And I try to emphasize when I'm first starting to work with a lifter. A lot of it just kind of comes down to individual stuff. I don't like force the same things on everyone. It's more of just assessing where the client's at and going off of that. All right. How do I learn to recognize fatigue patterns in lifters? What fatigues them? How long it takes to dissipate? Pretty simple, honestly. As long as they're filling out their training logs, as long as they are communicating with me how they're feeling, I can pretty much tell how beat up they're getting from the given deadlift frequency, volume, intensity that I'm giving them. Another way that's really easy to look at is just how they're built. Kind of similar to what I was saying earlier. about the training principles of, like fatigue management, SRA, individual differences. Something there that's really important is just how someone's built. So if someone's built like me, I'm probably going to be able to deadlift more frequently and harder than someone that is not built like me, right? Someone that is very short, stocky, stubby, right? Maybe they have to round excessively just to even get to the bar. They're going to get more beat up by deadlifts than someone that's, say, really built to squat, right? Like squat really beats the crap out of me. So I'm not going to be able to deadlift as frequently or as hard as someone that is built to squat. So a lot of that is just looking at how someone's built and then getting feedback from the individual lifter on how things are feeling, right? Tailoring the response basically to the individual. I'll usually come up with a plan in general where I think, okay, this is probably how we need to attack their, squat, bench, and deadlift. And then I let their feedback kind of guide my process on if I was correct or incorrect. All right, and last question of the day is going to be what makes a good powerlifter and what makes a bad powerlifter. I think it's going to be easier to define what makes a good lifter, and you can honestly just invert basically what I'm saying for bad lifter, right? So first thing I have written down is they try to go 9 for 9 or 8 for 9, basically make as many attempts at meets as they can. Reason I say that is because people tend to think that going 9 for 9 means you are not trying, and I think that's just foolish. Really, the way you should be looking at it is you have 3 attempts for each lift to get as close to your max weight as possible. You're using each attempt as a stepping stone for the third, so that way you can get as close as you can. So the first, your opener, you're feeling it out. You're seeing, okay, where should I go maybe on my second, given my training, given how I feel today. You go from there to your second. Your second is, okay, how did that last one feel? How much do I really think I have left in the tank on the day, given my training, given how I'm feeling today, right? You're not just taking sandbagged attempts. And I think people like to paint other lifters in that light when they go 9 for 9. And I'll be the first to say it. I think people that tend to shit on going 9 for 9 are not good lifters, because more often than not, they are missing a lot of their attempts. They're getting injured very frequently. They don't tend to hit their goals very frequently. And you just don't see them doing really good things in the sport for a long period of time. Might be a hot take, but that's just how I look at it. Number 2, they are aiming for long-term progress versus short-term gratification, or at least most of the time. I think we can all understand that we have an ego in this sport. We're all just trying to lift big weights. That's inherently ego-driven. But the best lifters or good lifters are going to be chasing, that long-term progression, rather than just trying to hit something that's going to look cool on Instagram, right? So they're trying to think of every time they go into each session, what can I do today that's going to set up my next session to be very successful? And they just do that over and over and over and over and over for, a whole training cycle, for whole years, right? For their whole career. Whereas a bad lifter might just say, what can I hit today that's going to feel really good and look cool, and then I'm going to get, a bunch of likes on Instagram. I'm kind of painting like a general picture here. And I think that's sometimes okay to do, but good lifters more often than not will stray towards that first option rather than the second one. Third option, they embrace monotony. I already kind of mentioned this before about like what makes someone have good genetics. These lifters will lean into doing the boring things day in and day out. Like I said, they're not going to be just going off a program and maxing out, because they know that's not going to be the best thing for long-term progress. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. Number 4, they are consistent in their training and in their outside variables. If you are constantly missing sessions, if you are constantly needing to change things that don't need to be changed, right? You're just bored. Or, if you're going out partying all the time, you're not eating your meals, you're not going to bed at a consistent time, you're not managing your stress very well, basically everything is chaotic, you're just not going to be a good lifter, right? Consistency is king in this sport and in most sports, and that means that eating consistent foods at consistent times throughout the day, doing consistent things in the gym, doing consistent things outside the gym, like going to sleep at the right time, so on and so forth, right? So having that consistency is going to make you a good lifter. Bad lifters are just inconsistent people. And lastly, they treat themselves like an athlete. Now, this is something I don't think is talked about a ton, but I definitely noticed this trend in powerlifting where people like to beat the crap out of themselves, and they do it in almost in this way of like this machismo, like, yeah, I left it all out there. I really like, hit it super hard today. I felt exhausted, but that's, awesome. It's like, not always, dude. I mean, we are trained to get better at the competitive lifts and put our best numbers up on the platform. If you feel like you need to beat the crap out of yourself in the gym all the time as a form of like, self-flagellation, that's not a trait of a good lifter. Like you're kind of just like using lifting as like a form of therapy, and you're getting the pain that is coming from your lifting is giving you some sort of mental satisfaction. If you want to be a good lifter, you're probably going to have to train smarter and be kinder to yourself, right? I'm going to say that again. If you want to be the best lifter you can be, eventually you are going to have to be kinder to yourself as a lifter and treat yourself like an athlete. That means not beating the shit out of yourself in the gym. That means sometimes, cutting a workout short so you can go home and get enough sleep so you can recover from what you have been doing. That's going to mean eating a lot better and not just like shoveling McDonald's into your face, eating like low to no micronutrient foods. Treating yourself well is a habit and a characteristic of a good lifter and a good athlete. And if you're just treating your body like crap, like it's like a used car, you're not going to be a good lifter. So that ends today's Q&A. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm trying to get better at these things. I know I have a lot of filler words. I say and I'm not the best at my public speaking yet, but I'm trying to get better with these things. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you like these videos, if there's anything else that I can do better as a content creator, if there's anything else you'd want to see from me. But thank you so much for tuning in, and hope to see you guys again next time.